countrywide to make sure they can hire a few more people in Texas, and today they aren't in Texas anymore, but they've taken our taxpayer dollars. We just gave $1 million last week to that little bitty teeny tiny insurance company. I might have heard of it, Allstate. Allstate gets $1 million of our money. Why? That's a bailout. That's an incentive. It's not his to give. It's not his to give. We don't have government that understands that. I've made the argument in this campaign that this free society, this constitutional republic, used to stand on 3 pillars: individuals and families, communities and churches, and the government. It's not the government's job to take care of the society. That rests with individuals and families and within the community when the family can't meet its needs. It doesn't belong on the table of government. So we've seen that government grow and grow, and we've got to be asking ourselves, are there things that Texas can do? And lo and behold, about the time we're undertaking that study in this campaign to figure out what the state can do, along come those crazy Tea Party people and those crazy 9/12 people, and they began to demand state sovereignty. Because they understood, and our founders understood, that that is exactly what the federal government would do. It was the prevailing argument at the time that the Constitution was ratified. We don't want a big federal government. We like these little sovereign states. We don't want a big federal government. And the authors of the Constitution said, we've got it. We've limited the federal government. All it can do is Article 1, Section 8. And the colonists said that's not enough. And the author said, we'll give you the 10th Amendment. All powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the states and the people. And we began to look at what that relationship was supposed to look like. And believe it or not, they anticipated exactly what's happening today. And Thomas Jefferson said, it is the unquestionable right of the states to determine when the federal government steps outside the bounds of that compact. He called the Constitution a compact, an agreement between the state and the federal government. It's the unquestionable right of the states to determine when the federal government steps outside that compact. I had said over the course of this last week, perhaps we would have understood Mr. Jefferson more clearly if he would have said it's the unquestionable duty of the state. They knew that the federal government would grow, and they left the power with us to check that. You let the kids run willy-nilly through the house, the kids are going to run willy-nilly through the house and break things. You sit on your hands, states, and let Washington grow, and she's going to grow, and she's going to take and take and take until you draw a line in the sand and say, no, you're not coming into our sovereign state anymore. I traveled and spoke some with Sheriff Richard Mack, who was a rural county sheriff from Arizona. He challenged the mighty federal government when Bill Clinton was president. Some of you may remember the Brady bill. Sheriff Mack said there were some provisions in that bill that he believed were unconstitutional, and he was going to be required as a county sheriff to enforce them, and he didn't want to enforce them, so he stepped into that David and Goliath ring as well. And he said he's the only person who ever filed a non-sexual lawsuit against Bill Clinton. He won that lawsuit. It's Prince Mack versus the United States of America on a state sovereignty argument, on a 10th Amendment argument. That wasn't a Second Amendment lawsuit. It didn't violate his Second Amendment rights. It violated the Second Amendment rights of the citizens. And he won under the 10th Amendment, saying the federal government has no authority to tell the officers of a state how to conduct the business of their state. They have no authority here. Jefferson said the proper remedy is nullification and interposition. And we began to talk about that as the second cornerstone of this campaign. Private property ownership and gun ownership, the first. State sovereignty, the second. Mack says, you know what sovereign means? There's no authority over you. The U.S. government is sovereign in Article 1, Section 8, and that's it. Texas is sovereign everywhere else. There's a U.S. congressman not far from me not far from where I live, who served as a district judge in Texas before he went off to the Congress. And as I have been advancing this idea of nullification, and we wouldn't be the first, we wouldn't even be the first in the modern day to use it. Our friends in Montana have used it recently on several occasions. They nullified real ID in the state of Montana. They have nullified federal gun law in the state of Montana. Today, well, as of last November, I haven't counted recently, as of last November, 13 of our sister states have introduced nullification language against the federalization of health care. We sit on our hands and don't do a thing in Texas. And I met with this congressman because he had dealt with the law. He had been a judge, and I said, I'm believing that this is what Texas can do. It just so happened that the meeting we originally had set got rescheduled, and we ended up meeting on a Monday morning, I think at 9 a.m. It happened to be the Monday morning after the House had passed the health care bill. And I said to that congressman, it is my position and understanding, registered nurse, citizen of Texas, business degree person that I am, not a lawyer, but it's my understanding that the Texas Attorney General could file a brief in federal court as soon as the President signs that bill to challenge the constitutionality of the health care bill. Texas wouldn't have to do a thing. We've elected Attorney General to defend us, and he could drop that brief in federal court. Am I correct? Congressman said, yes, you are correct. We wouldn't have to do anything. If Attorney Abbott is so inclined, he can file that brief on behalf of the state of Texas. And I said, well, if we were to get a special session in Texas and we were to pass a state law that nullified that federal bill, would that help anything? And he said, oh yeah, that would help a lot. It would give the Attorney General a second cause of action. Not only could he argue that that bill was unconstitutional, it's illegal in the state of Texas because we got a law that says it's illegal. And so that's how you use nullification. It's a legislative tool where your state says that federal action. I had a state representative in Oklahoma say to me, Debra, we got to quit calling that stuff federal law. It's illegal federal action. If there's no authority in the Constitution, it's not law. It's illegal federal action, and we need to pass a law in our state that calls a spade a spade. It's going to be illegal here in Texas. You don't have the authority to do that. Up until that point, I had been saying that I wasn't sure where we should start. If nullification is the tool that the founders gave us, you tell me, where do we start, Texas? Do we take on education first? Do we say to Washington, D.C., look, our Constitution says, in order that our children would understand liberty, the state of Texas will provide a free public education for the general dissemination of knowledge. We don't need Washington telling moms and dads in Texas how to teach their kids. Get out of education in Texas. Is that where we begin to nullify and push Washington out? And many of you said, yeah, let's start there. Or perhaps you've noticed that we have a little agriculture industry in Texas. There's a few farmers and ranchers here, and we've had the federal government on their back and in their business for 60 years. Should we start in ag? And some of you may be involved in the energy business here in Texas. Maybe we ought to start with energy. My thinking was that there was probably a legal precedent somewhere that if we would chip away at that one, remember that 52 pickup sticks you used to play and you try to pull, if we could pull that legal prop out, would the whole house of cards fall down, and would we get the federal government? Where do we get the most bang for our buck? Where do we start that fight? And in that conversation, that congressman said to me, Debra, you might set your sights on the EPA.